Good morning. You're probably wondering, where did that reading go? Well, the text for the sermon is actually our prelude, because I've been really in touch with that song. As I walk through this wicked world, searching for light in the darkness of insanity, I ask myself, is all hope lost? And the world has been feeling wicked and insane of late. Last week, a lawyer representing the United States government from the Department of Justice appeared before an appeals court in the Ninth Circuit and made an argument that has been reported widely as children in Border Patrol custody don't need soap. But the argument she was making was actually much worse. The argument that the government was making, so they house all of our detention centers are under a consent decree, which means a court found in the past they did stuff wrong. The government said, this is what you got to do to fix it. And in that consent decree, it says people need to be kept in safe and sanitary conditions. And the argument she was making is that no reasonable person can know what safe and sanitary means. So we can't be bound by that agreement, because how do we know what that is? When you hear arguments like that, we are truly living in a world where for some, logic and truth mean nothing, because such an argument feels insane. Who'd want to do such a thing? But that's not the only insanity that's been weighing down my heart. Maybe it's been a weight on you. As that song continues, I ask myself, is all hope lost? Is there only pain and hatred and misery? As some of you may know, I'm a hospital chaplain who works with veterans. So I work with those who have fought in our nation's war. So I take the idea of war very seriously. And I believe, as I'm sure many of you and many Americans believe, that war should be truly for only when there's no other option, when there's a military threat to us or our allies that makes war necessary. And I believe that those who make those decisions should focus, among other things, on what war demands from our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen and airwomen, our Marines, who will be doing the fighting. So hearing that this week we almost launched a bombing raid against Iran over a drone aircraft being shot down, and that final twist that it was Trump calling off the airstrike because he was worried about it being an asymmetric response. He who so rarely seems to show good sense is the one who led us back from the possibility of a war. And can we trust that he would do that again? Is there only pain and hatred and misery? We don't even hear about what's happening in Afghanistan or Iraq, even though our men and women in uniform are still dying there, and Afghanis and Iraqis. In Syria, we don't hear about the civil war anymore, or the refugees, and what will happen there, not just to our forces, but to our allies, especially the Kurds. Is there only pain and hatred and misery? And here today, ICE was supposed to be conducting raids to gather up families for deportation. There was a last-minute change in that plan too, but that doesn't change their fear. Most of them have been here for years, working hard, living lives, hiding from authority, but trying to build a good life for their family. And they live in fear today, not knowing when the government will come for them. Is there only pain and hatred and misery? And each time I feel like this inside, there's one thing I want to know. What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? What's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? At its heart, our liberal religious tradition has always held that peace and love and understanding are the keys to life. And it often seems impossible that this can be true in the world the way it is. But that has always been the case. And how often have you heard somebody make fun of empathy? That feeling of an emotional connection to another person seems pointless and ludicrous to some. Why is that so? That old phrase that gets thrown, bleeding heart liberal, that is making fun of our traditional dedication to increasing peace and love and understanding. And it's been this way for a long time. It's not new. And that feeling that I'm talking about, how to find a way in a world that feels calamitous, that is also not new. When it feels as if my heart has already broken and I'm just waiting for a breeze to blow it all apart. And that feeling, I'm not alone. Some of you may have felt that too, and you are not alone. It is as old as time, but it hurts no less for being shared across the ages. We ministers seek to find proof in the experiences of others, to share proof with you of that which we want us as a group to believe. In traditional religious communities, that proof comes from scripture and life experiences. For us liberal religious folks, it comes from all of the human experience. Since I started out as a historian, I tend to turn to history and places when these struggles have taken place. So I look back, and I did find some hope to hang on to as my heart struggles to find its next beat through all the pain that is all around us. Believe it or not, there was a time in America when liberal religion and traditional religion battled for the hearts and minds of America, and liberal religion won. The 19th century was a heyday for liberal religion. Of course, liberal religion looked different back then. It was mostly the Christian social gospel, the one that is now being battled over again as liberal Christians are trying to win back ground. By the turn of the 20th century, it was everywhere. It is the belief in the social gospel that Jesus came to improve the material conditions of the poor and dispossessed and show us that that was the work of community. He asked his followers to feed and clothe the poor. And for this movement, that was the goal. What can we do to feed and clothe the poor, to care for the sick, to reduce suffering? There was a time in America when the Jesus who was up above our altar, the Jesus who asked others, who served others and asked us to do the same, was the idea that fueled all the mainline churches and so much work to reduce the deprivations of poverty. And so what happened? Well, what happened first was World War I, and then World War II, and the Holocaust. And in the face of a world with that much evil, with that much pain, with that much loss, the theological response was to say, this idea you have about love, it cannot be real. Because how could it be real? And this also be real? It said, "You're wrong about the world, because otherwise how could there be so much pain and tragedy and loss?" And the assault on liberal religion, on peace and love and understanding, began again with new vigor. And the heartbreak was too much. For how can you believe in peace and love when all you see is misery? And people lost faith. They claimed a faith in a new kind of God, but not a God who truly loved all humanity. And they lost faith in the possibility of human actions making the world a better place, using our love and peace and understanding in our world. They lost faith that what is divine could be found in seeking to make this world a better world, to continue to fight against hate and fear and misery. But they missed the point. And on my hard days, I almost forget that believing in peace and love and understanding isn't about believing in the impossible while overlooking the pain and the sorrow. It is not a pie-in-the-sky escape, as it is shown. It's not ignoring the ways in which the world feels chaotic and wicked and sometimes evil. And that is where the faith comes in. The best definition of faith I have seen is belief in things unseen. Well, peace, love, and understanding feel unbelievable, nonsensical at times like this. And that is where we have to find our faith. I have to believe that if anything can lessen the pain, if anything can improve the world, if anything can reduce the misery, it must be us and people like us joining together all around the world to do the work of peace and love and understanding. And people are doing that work. Even now, people are volunteering as lawyers down on the border to try to speed up the asylum reviews, to give representation so that people don't just get deported or held in detention forever. There are groups who are doing fundraising to pay for bail for the parents, because in many cases what the officials are saying is, until the parents can be released, we can't give them back their kids. We can't release the parents until we know they're not a flight risk. So even though they have nothing, we are going to say they owe us bail. And sometimes they say they are going to also add the travel costs of bringing the kids to them after they've separated them. And just like DJ's story earlier about Caden, about how raising the money to fix the right now doesn't solve the big problem, it still fixes the right now while we try to solve the bigger problem. We need to do both. So there are groups who will raise money to pay for all those costs, to get the parents out of detention so they can get their kids back. There are the lawyers who are showing up in court, arguing for safe conditions. There are the people who are going down and witnessing to bring us the news, the real things that are happening. And we have little pop-up actions that are happening to bring more awareness. Because we do have an entire machine out there that's trying to tell us, you've heard them, they're not our kids, but they're criminals and they're dangerous. It's an invasion. We need to keep them there. And here in New York City, I don't know how many of you saw them in person or even the pictures, the artist who started doing sculptures of children lying on the sidewalk in cages to help us see this is what's real. And part of doing that is tying into that love and understanding part of us. Because who can look at that and say that that's okay? When Kirstjen Nielsen was Secretary of DHS, She tried so hard to pretend that 4 walls made out of chicken wire is not a cage. That's not a cage, she said. It's like, yes, yes it is. And the people who are all looking for a way to change it, that's where we have to be. We can't let the pain and the misery keep us from doing what we can, from finding our way. Because that is what has always changed things in this country. We focus on usually when the big legislation happens, when the big change happens. But in pretty much every case, what has happened before that was years and years and years of people doing everything they could. People helping the people closest that they could get their hands on to help. People mobilizing to protest, to do letters to Congress, to go and see their Congress people. And then it's somehow like, when it ends, it's like a switch turns and the change comes. Everybody says, see, look, they just did that and that happened. It's like, no, that's not how it happened. There were thousands and thousands of people who got together, and they were fueled by this desire for life to be better for everyone. One of the examples of how it is that understanding, that care about one another becomes the thing that turns the key. I told you I used to be a historian. Well, most people don't know that after how many years the abolitionists spent telling the rest of America that slavery was wrong, that slavery broke people, that slavery caused misery and suffering. And most of the country did not listen to them. It's one of the things people don't realize, that even before the Constitution, there were people involved in that process who were saying, no, slavery is wrong, slavery will be bad, not just for the slaves, but for the country. And they were ignored. Benjamin Rush, one of the signers of the Constitution, was an abolitionist. And that was in the 1700s. So what happened in the 1860s? I know when you read your textbooks, they all talk about the changes in the Industrial Revolution and the cotton gin and things like that. But you know who Abraham Lincoln said caused that war? It was Harriet Beecher Stowe, a woman who wrote a book. She's the first person to write a book that was about the suffering of slaves from their perspective. Now, this book was Uncle Tom's Cabin. The images of people is racist, because it is. Her sense of who they were is not real, because she did not know slaves. This was her imagination from all the stories she's heard. It was the best she could do. But what she captured was what it means when a mother who loves her child is separated from her child, what it means where families are torn apart, what it means when you're beaten. And that book awoke, especially in the northern whites, an understanding about what slavery was in a way nothing had before. It's not that people hadn't been telling them, hadn't told them facts, hadn't told stories, but something about the way she wrote that story unlocked the hearts. And there was this sudden urge that it had to change. And yes, we still fought a big old war over it. And yes, we still had Jim Crow and all sorts of things. But we probably never even would have gotten there without that basic love for one another that unlocks that voice inside that says, no, we are not going to sit by and let this be. So what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? This war against liberal religion is a war on peace and love and understanding, against empathy, not because they're so funny, but because they aren't. I focused on some of the recent changes and some of the old ones, but if you look back in change after change, what has led change in America and in many other parts of the world has been that moment of connection where we suddenly take somebody who we've been told is our enemy and say, oh, they're another human who suffers just like us. That moment of connection. Whether it was the outrage at the treatment of civil rights protesters in the South that finally led to the Civil Rights Act. That was a mobilization of caring and love. British outrage at the treatment of Gandhi and his followers led to the changes in India. Time and again, I could give you example after example, but the proof is really in this war on empathy, on love, the derision heaped on peace and love and understanding. Those who do not want change, those who do not want a world with more fairness, with more justice, more equity, more peace, more love. Because if we have those, we will once again demand that we work on poverty, that we seek to end war, as we have, that we again seek to end misery when we see it and feel it. And whenever a group of us gets going, and you've seen it, a whole group all over the country, different people will rise up and say no. And then they start using those jaded words, bleeding heart, idealist. But even in that moment in the Court of Appeals, the proof of the human spirit was actually right there. Because while the lawyer made that argument, the judges did not believe what they were hearing. She could not really be saying that. Some of their questions were like, really? That's what you're trying to tell us? One of the judges said, maybe safe and sanitary isn't defined explicitly in the agreement because we all know what that means. Of course, we all know that anybody who's being kept for more than a day needs soap and a toothbrush and toothpaste. And of course, they need to be able to lie down somewhere that's not on concrete and not with the lights on so they can actually sleep. This response, saying, no, knowing this is easy. We all know this. Was a reminder that we do know these things. And more than that, it was the response to that hearing. First, people started sharing the audio recordings, then the transcripts, then the videos of the hearing. And most people are horrified that this is what the US government is doing. And people all are organizing. Just as people organized to be ready for the ICE raids that were to happen today. I don't know about you, but I saw lots of people sharing, saying, post this, not just online, but go print physical copies and give them to people of what to do if ICE shows up at your door. This is who to call. This is a phone number that will get you help. This was not just sitting back and saying, oh, this is horrible. People were saying, what do we do about this? How do we stop this? There's an old saying about the times that try people's souls. Well, these are times that try the soul. And there are souls filled with courage and with love and with dedication to others. And in every horror we find them, the people who make the choice to help someone else. And can there be any better proof of the strength of the human capacity for love of one another than that response? And so I say we need to reach down to our hearts, especially when our hearts are weary and full of pain and that hatred and that misery. And we need to find that spark inside ourselves to say, what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? Can we find the faith to say, yes, there is pain and hatred and misery, but I still know deep inside that peace and love and understanding are not so funny. They are what we must trust, where we can find strength, and they will help us find our way through this darkness of insanity. So what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding? I stand here with my faith, shaken but not broken, and say nothing. And somehow we as a community, as a religious body, as part of a larger religious faith, must find ways to live out our belief in one another and in humanity, not ignoring the pain, but because it is the only way to reduce the pain and misery, to show the world there is nothing funny about peace, love, and understanding.